Aoki, who had been watching them, sneered, "Too late to run now." His voice was low, almost to himself. "Ghastly, take care of the one trying to escape. Slowpoke, psychic the coughing, fighting Murkrow. Miltank, use milk drink." Ghastly melted into the shadows, ready to strike, but the two rocket thugs stayed constantly on guard and kept their coughing close. Ghastly couldn't afford to waste time on them. Sometimes an unseen enemy was the deadliest. When Kevin finally turned to flee, Ghastly saw his chance and, at Aoki's command, slipped from the darkness to appear right in front of him. Under Kevin's horrified stare, Ghastly used hypnosis and put him under. Pokemon moves were devastating against untrained humans. Hypnosis would put an ordinary person out for hours. With Kevin immobilized, Slowpoke and Murkrow finished off his last coughing. Murkrow tore the Pokemon apart without mercy. The other rocket grunt didn't attempt to run. He had watched what happened to Kevin and knew that fleeing would only quicken his death. He clung to his lone coughing like a lifeline, eyes darting anxiously to Aoki but not daring to meet him. Their original plan had been simple. The man in the Alliance uniform opposite them would be at most their equal, maybe a little stronger, but inexperienced, a sheltered Alliance trainer who'd never seen real battle. Even if he was tougher than expected, they could toy with him. They had not expected the supposedly dull, harmless trainer to be so cold and precise. If Ghastly hadn't struck Kevin's Golbat first, they would not have been reduced to such a hopeless position so quickly. Aoki watched the trembling man and walked up slowly, giving no order to continue the assault. The rocket grunt brightened at the sliver of hope. If he wasn't killed outright, there might still be a way out. He could get close, pull a dagger from his belt, and finish Aoki. If he reacted fast enough, he could grab the Pokeballs at his waist, recall Slowpoke and Murkrow, and turn the tables. The thought made his hands tremble with a restrained eagerness. He kept the expression of submission well rehearsed. Aoki stopped a couple of paces away, smiling down at the man who seemed to have given up. "I'm going to ask you a few questions. Give me the answers I want, and I'll let you go." The man's eyes lit up. Then he lowered his head to hide it and put on an obedient tone. "Please, ask." He was expert at playing weak. Aoki didn't call the bluff. He asked, "Who's in charge of Team Rocket's Mahogany Town base right now?" The grunt blinked. This was a question anyone with inside knowledge would know. The highest-ranking officer at the base now is Commander Athena. Only Dr. Shiranu is her equal. He swallowed, adding the names the way a man names Vindication. Aoki let that information settle. Athena, one of the 4 rocket generals, ranked high. Aoki knew her standing was comparable to the likes of Sabrina and Giovanni's inner circle. Dr. Shiranu was a notable specialist as well, a researcher reputed for evolutionary work and the experiments at the Lake of Rage base that would one day produce the Red Gyarados. Aoki pushed on. "How far along is the research at the Lake of Rage facility?" The question stunned the grunt. That was classified. How could he possibly know? Panic broke out over his face. Sweat ran down his temples. He stared at Aoki for 3 seconds, then dropped to his knees. I don't know. I really don't." He didn't try to bluff. Anyone in the know would be dangerous. Making something up would be suicide. The man's desperation showed he'd read the situation correctly. Aoki, however, had asked the second question for a different reason. He didn't intend to honor his promise to let the man go, even if the answer had been pleasing. More importantly, Aoki hadn't actually known who was in command at Mahogany when he'd come here in his previous life. He wanted to know if the top leadership still held the base. Years earlier, the Alliance had struck a surprise attack on Team Rocket at Mahogany, led by Price, and the assault had devastated Rocket forces. If the commander was still present, it meant an Alliance strike could happen again, and Aoki needed to act quickly. The kneeling grunt wasn't finished resisting. In one sudden move, he drew a dagger from his belt and lunged at Aoki, who was only a step away. But he never completed the motion. Slowpoke's eyes glowed blue as it used Psychic, freezing the man in midair. Under his panicked, suspended gaze, Murkrow raked his throat open with a swift slash. Meanwhile, Ghastly had hypnotized the other coughing into unconsciousness. The whole encounter had taken maybe 10 to 15 minutes. 2 overconfident Team Rocket members lay dead, unable to comprehend how the mild-looking Alliance trainer could have been so ruthless and so composed in battle. Kevin, still under hypnosis, died in his sleep. His remaining coughing was cut down by Slowpoke and Murkrow. Aoki spared the Golbat and Arbok they'd encountered earlier. He judged they still had some use. The skirmish was over. Aoki walked away from the bodies and the ruined pride of Team Rocket, knowing the information he'd gathered mattered more than the momentary satisfaction of mercy. 10th update. Please subscribe. Please subscribe. Chapter 142. Watched again. After gathering the spoils of war, Aoki had Miltank restore Murkrow and Slowpoke's stamina. Suddenly he felt a gaze on him. He'd noticed something like it during the fight and assumed it had come from one of the two Pokémon, but now that both were defeated, the feeling remained. He looked up and scanned the area, but there was no movement. That lack of movement was what made it so eerie. The battle was over, and the clearing was unnaturally quiet. A dark shape flashed across a large tree about 50 or 60 meters away. If he hadn't already felt watched, he might have written it off as a trick of the eye. Once the shape disappeared, the sensation of being observed vanished too. That only confirmed what he suspected. Something had been watching them. Aoki frowned. The shadow had been small and fast, not tall or bulky, clearly not human, but a Pokémon. It moved with the agility of a climber, so it wasn't one of the big quadrupeds. What surprised him most was that Slowpoke, usually the most sensitive of his Pokémon, hadn't sensed it. He shook his head and set the matter aside for now. The stranger hadn't attacked, which meant it was either wary of Aoki and his team, or merely curious and not hostile. They packed up quickly. The smell of blood would draw wild Pokémon, so lingering was unwise. What Aoki didn't know was that after they left, the dark shape reappeared in the clearing. It stood beside the corpse of the Weezing for a moment, then vanished in a flash. Deeper into the forest, shafts of sunlight thinned as the canopy thickened and the temperature dropped on the road toward the ice mountain. People rarely came this way, so Aoki let his Pokémon roam and spar freely to make up for the slow leveling since Trial Island. They'd fought for a few days in the wilds between Goldenrod and Ekrutiak, but it hadn't been enough. The route through this forest gave them a chance to train, and the wild Pokémon here were stronger than those nearer the cities. The harsher environment and fewer human intrusions had raised the local levels. A level 30 Persian was currently making that clear as it harried Murkrow, Slowpoke, and Miltank. Persian, yellow, gender, female, level 30. Type, normal ability, technician, held item, none. Egg moves, tail whip, foul play. Base moves, swift, play rough, switcheroo, scratch, growl, bite, fake out, fury swipes, screech, feint attack, taunt tutor moves, iron tail, water pulse, snatch. Its potential rating was only yellow, but at level 30 with technician, its fake out and fury swipes were dangerous. Without Miltank's milk drink replenishments, Aoki's team would have been hard-pressed to handle it. Ghastly stayed by Aoki's side instead of joining the fight, partly to guard against ambushes, and partly because normal types are immune to ghost moves, and Ghastly hadn't learned the toxic he'd bought at the game corner yet. Normal has no type advantages, aside from its immunity interactions with Ghost and vulnerability to fighting, and none of Aoki's Pokémon knew fighting-type moves. The battle had an awkward balance to it. Persian relied on raw speed, the skill that had kept it alive in the wild. Miltank's block stopped any attempt to flee, and with coordinated pressure from Murkrow and Slowpoke plus Aoki's timing, they wore the cat down until it could no longer battle. Aoki threw a Pokeball and captured the exhausted Persian. A level 30 Persian with technician would fetch a good price at the Hunters Guild. Lately, Aoki found he couldn't help but picture every wild Pokemon as stacks of color-coded currency, a bad habit born of being short on money. He took the Pokeball from Ghastly's eager paw, shrank and locked it, and slipped it into his pocket. The Persian hadn't been injured so much as simply exhausted. A rest would restore it. After stowing the ball, he had Miltank top everyone off. Then the feeling of being watched returned. Aoki paused, frowning. "Slowpoke, use your psychic sense. See if anything's hiding nearby," he said quietly. Slowpoke hesitated but did as instructed. A psychic pulse radiated out, seeping through trunks and underbrush. Nothing registered. Slowpoke slowly shook its head. The frown on Aoki's face deepened. He considered ordering Murkrow to scout, but before he could decide, the sensation of being watched ebbed away again. Once might be coincidence, twice was suspicious. He didn't linger. The sun was already low. "Let's move on and find a place to set up dinner," Aoki said after a moment, deciding the unknown watcher had left, and there was nothing to be gained by searching. They needed to find a campsite before dark. "I miscounted earlier. My mistake. Please subscribe. Please vote monthly." Chapter 143, Speculation. Early in the morning, Aomori dropped from a large tree and landed on the dew-soaked grass, breathing in the cool, slightly damp air. He stretched and felt a few soft pops in his joints. As he moved, the rest of his Pokémon climbed down from the branches one by one. This forest was different from the woods outside Goldenrod City. The wild Pokémon here were generally stronger, so Aomori and his team had spent the night up in the trees to be safe. He also couldn't stop thinking about the shadowy figure that had watched them the day before. It hadn't shown itself overnight, but the memory kept him from relaxing entirely. After a good sleep, he felt refreshed. The ice mountain that had seemed distant yesterday now felt within reach. Through the thick canopy, they could already make out larger outcroppings of rock and patches of frost on the slopes. At the same time, the air grew colder as they drew nearer. They ate quickly and set off. Travel was slow, both because of the high level of the local Pokémon and because this forest was carved into territories. Some zones belonged to powerful lone Pokémon. Others were held by groups that defended every inch. Territorial Pokémon were exclusive. A lone guardian could be avoided, its domain too large to patrol constantly, but group territories were dangerous. The numbers and coverage made it easy to be driven out, or worse, chased. What troubled Aomori most were the Beedrill. Though native to Kanto, Beedrill were common in Johto as well, and when one colony established itself, its population exploded. If not for predators, Aomori joked, Beedrill might overrun the world. Predators did keep them in check. Pidgey and Spearow fed on Weedle, Ursaring, and some flying species raided Beedrill for honey, but still, their swarms were enormous. Earlier that morning, Aomori had accidentally strayed into a Beedrill territory and been driven out. The colony here was far larger and more powerful than the one he'd faced on Trial Island. After Murkrow and the others teamed up to knock back a heavy number of them, the whole group had been enraged and forced Aomori to retreat. Panting from the exertion, Aomori accepted a fresh cup of milk offered by Miltank. He smiled gratefully, patted her head, and gulped it down. The milk restored some of his strength. No sooner had he wiped the corner of his mouth than that familiar sense of being watched crept over him again, stronger this time, as if the shadow had drawn closer. He looked down at the empty cup in his hand. An idea struck him. He took another bottle of Miltank milk from his ring and set it on the ground. The feeling of being observed shifted immediately from the empty cup to the full bottle. Aomori thought back. The first time he'd felt watched had been after fighting two Team Rocket grunts, when Miltank had given milk to Murkrow and the others to restore their stamina. The second time had been when Murkrow and the others failed to finish off a Persian, but were able to outlast it after drinking Miltank's milk. Putting those moments together, Aomori realized what was attracting the attention. "It's the milk," he said to himself, amused and slightly uneasy. The bottle's scent clearly had a strong pull. It didn't seem to be after him personally, which was a relief, but a creature hiding and spying on them over and over felt malicious. He set the bottle down and signaled to Murkrow and the others to stay put. Quietly, he and his Pokémon pulled out into the trees and watched from a distance, leaving the milk alone on the forest floor. 10 minutes passed. The milk sat untouched. Just as Aomori was about to give up, something dropped from a nearby branch like a shadow. In a blink, it had scooped up the bottle and vanished again. "What was that?" Aomori whispered. Though it moved too fast for a clear view, he thought he glimpsed a flash of red and a pale white sheen on its back as it turned away. It fled toward the ice mountain. "Murkrow, go after it and see," Aomori ordered. Since he couldn't make it out from the trees, he wanted a closer look. Murkrow launched itself without hesitation, while Slowpoke and Miltank followed on the ground. They couldn't give full chase in the forest. They had to watch for wild Pokémon that might suddenly strike. Still, the direction the thief had taken led toward the mountain. Half an hour later, they reached a small lakeside, and Aomori sat down, breathing hard. 2 intense sprints in one day had taken a toll. Even a second bottle of Miltank's milk did little. His body had been pushed to its limits. Murkrow returned soon after, looking sheepish. It flapped its wings to say the other party was too fast and knew the terrain well. It had lost the trail. "It's fine," Aomori said, recovering his breath and comforting the bird. "Whatever took the milk will come back. I have a hunch what kind of Pokemon it might be." Chapter 144, Sneasel, Seeking Subscription, 12:15. As Aomori expected, the feeling of being watched returned during the afternoon break. This time he was careful. He had Slowpoke leave a psychic mark on the bottle of Miltank milk. Slowpoke's current ability to sense space through its teleport-related power could detect that imprint within 10 kilometers. It couldn't teleport him there directly, but knowing the location would eventually lead them to it. He set the bottle down again and watched from a distance with Slowpoke and the others. It didn't take long. After one taste of the milk, the Pokemon returned shortly after Aomori and his team had withdrawn. Aomori removed the weight from Murkrow so the bird could fly at full speed. Even if they lost track in the rough terrain, at least they would have a direction to follow, and once Aomori and Slowpoke got close, they'd find the culprit. 40 minutes later, Murkrow came back to Aomori, who had been trailing far behind. This time, it hadn't completely lost the scent. With the weight off, it could push itself harder, and with Tailwind helping it, had kept pace with the other Pokemon. Not wanting to alarm whatever was ahead, Murkrow returned to report as soon as the target stopped. Guided by Murkrow, Aomori's group closed in. They were nearing an ice-covered mountain, really a massive rocky peak heavily coated in ice and snow, so most people called it an ice mountain. From some angles, huge rock faces still showed through between the trees. At the mountain's base were countless fissures and small caves, and Slowpoke's perception indicated the psychic coordinates were coming from one of those caves. A cold gust hit them as they approached the entrance. Aomori felt his body shiver, and his breath came out white. He'd been so busy traveling and training, he hadn't noticed how deeply the cold would bite once he stopped. He pulled on the thick clothes he had prepared and felt a little warmth return. The difference between human and Pokemon bodies was astonishing. This cold barely affected Murkrow and the others. "Slowpoke, can you sense it?" Aomori asked, rubbing his numb hands into his sleeves. "Yeah, Don?" Slowpoke's eyes glowed faintly as it concentrated on the psychic mark it had left, nodding that it could still detect it. They avoided fights on the way in, repelling or slipping past wild Pokemon to prevent delays. As they closed in, Slowpoke's direction became unerringly precise. It stopped the careful sweeping of its senses and pointed instantly toward the source. If they moved fast enough, they'd find the Pokemon before it slipped away. 10 minutes later, they had reached the foot of the mountain and entered the cave. The air inside was far colder than Aomori had expected. Every breath felt like he'd inhaled a mouthful of ice. The cave was barely wide enough for 3 people abreast. The floor was glazed with layers of old ice that could send anyone sliding with one wrong step. Fortunately, Aomori had prepared ice walking boots. Slowpoke and Miltank were less comfortable on the slick ground, but Slowpoke wove a thin psychic membrane beneath its feet to steady itself. Deeper in, the passage widened and the ice on the ground thinned, revealing rock beneath. A steady, frigid draft, what locals call a lane wind, kept the cave mouth iced over year-round, but it diminished further inside. Moving quietly under Slowpoke's guidance, Aomori kept his steps soft. Then ahead in a dim niche of the cave, he finally saw the Pokemon that had been watching them and stealing the milk, a roughly 1-meter-tall figure, mostly black-furred, with a single red ear and a red-tipped tail visible from this angle, and white fur at the ends of its limbs. "It really is this Pokemon. My luck's holding," Aomori thought, unable to hide his excitement. It was Sneasel, one of the rarer Johto region Pokemon, a dark ice type. Aomori grinned inwardly. Back on Earth, in the games he'd played, Sneasel was a favorite, a rare dragon slayer in certain matchups. In practice, though, the dark ice combination was awkward. It left Sneasel with a long list of vulnerabilities. It was quadruply weak to fighting-type moves, so a single hit from a fighting type at the same level could end it. It was doubly weak to rock, Bug, Steel, Fire, and Fairy, 5 more dangerous matchups. Out of the 18 types, being quad weak to 1 and doubly weak to 5 made for a wide array of threats. But Aomori also knew Sneasel's strengths all too well. Its speed, its sneaky dark typing, and its powerful ice moves could make it a deadly ambusher when used right. He kept those thoughts to himself for now. There was still the matter of catching, or at least identifying this individual. He tightened his grip, ready to move forward once the opportunity presented itself. Chapter 145, An Excellent Hunter, Seeking First Order. As a Dark-type Pokemon, Sneasel's greatest advantage is its immunity to psychic attacks, which makes it deadly against psychic types. It also hits Ghost, Ice, and Dark types hard, giving it a big edge against those opponents. That doesn't make it the ideal primary attacker for an entire team, but it's a superb breaker against particular foes. Sneasel is born to be an assassin, high attack and speed, low defense and HP, the classic glassy hit-and-run fighter. Even when it evolves into Weavile, those traits only intensify. Its growth path is practically set from the start. Sneasel's nature is cunning and fierce. It takes delight in stealing wild Pokemon's eggs, puncturing a tiny hole with its claws to suck out the contents. The reason it had been fixated on Miltank's milk was simple. The way Aoki's Pokemon drank it, and the slightly fishy, raw milky scent, reminded Sneasel of the flavor of egg white seeped from a broken egg. It mistook the milk for its favorite food. When Aoki first left the milk unattended, Sneasel took it cautiously and fell in love with the taste, better than egg white. That's why it kept targeting Aoki's team later. Still, because it had survived in the wild, it was overly cautious. Sneasel's primary tactic as a thief, no, as an assassin, was to hide in the shadows, watch silently, and seek weaknesses. That instinct explains why Slowpoke's psychic perception hadn't detected it. Sneasel's dark typing made it naturally resistant to psychic senses. Aoki and the others finally caught Sneasel's attention as it was savoring the prize. The moment it noticed them, its ears pricked and it turned. The little bottle of milk it clutched was immediately hidden behind its back in a protective gesture that made Aoki smile. Still, he didn't underestimate the Pokemon. Its appearance and posture belied how dangerous it could be. Pokemon Sneasel, light gender, male, level 25, type Dark Ice, ability Keen Eye held item none, egg moves, Bite, Ice Punch, Ice Shard, Icicle Crash. Basic moves, Scratch, Leer, Taunt, Quick Attack, Fank, Icy Wind, Fury Swipes, Agility, Metal Claw, Hone Claws. Tutor moves, Knock Off, Snatch, Low Kick, TMHM none. When Aoki read Sneasel's aptitude and moves, his eyes lit up. That light blue aptitude was the best among his current Pokemon. Only his still young Skorupi could come close. What excited him most, though, were those 3 Ice-type egg moves. Having 3 inherited ice moves strongly suggested one or both of Sneasel's parents excelled at ice attacks. Ice moves dominated its learned repertoire. That meant Sneasel had exceptional ice talent, exactly the sort of potential Aoki wanted. Sneasel, let's battle. If you lose, you'll become my Pokemon. Aoki's voice was almost smug, an unusual burst of youthfulness for him. He felt a thrill he couldn't hide. This Sneasel was perfect. If he could capture it, it would be his signature Pokemon as a hunter, eventually a Weavile. Sneasel was tailor-made for capturing other Pokemon. Unlike video game abstractions where moves are just damage, in the real world, ice moves have a key utility. They slow. Ice energy can dull reaction and nerve speed, and in extreme cold can even freeze. Slow an opponent and then hit with lightning speed. No prey could outrun Sneasel's pursuit. Sneasel, Aoki called. Sneasel answered with a loud cry, spirited despite the way its claws still guarded the milk. Then it turned to flee. Aoki had been watching closely. Miltank, block, he ordered. Just as Sneasel tried to bolt, a tall figure stepped in front of its escape route, arms spread to seal it off. Cornered, Sneasel pressed back against the cave wall, clutching the milk behind its back as if that made it safer. Survival in the wild had taught it to prioritize food above almost everything else. Its posture reminded Miltank of its own early struggles. Miltank's eyes softened in sympathy. Aoki didn't rush in to seize the milk. If he wanted to capture Sneasel, he couldn't make a bad impression, nor could he snatch something as crucial as food from a wild Pokemon. He produced 2 bottles of Miltank milk from his ring and set them down about 10 paces away from where Sneasel crouched. The sight widened Sneasel's eyes. It stared at the bottles intently. If not for the several strong Pokémon surrounding Aoki, it would have leapt forward at once. Sneasel, let's battle. If you win, those 2 bottles of milk are yours. What do you say? Aoki asked, smiling. To any casual observer, he must have looked like a strange uncle bargaining with a child. Sneasel hesitated. It wasn't dumb. It had once ventured near human settlements when food was scarce and had seen what life under human care could be like. It had returned to the wild because though food was sometimes scarce, freedom was more valuable. But those 2 bottles of milk were a temptation. It had not tasted something so rich in a long time. More than that, the strange energy in the milk could restore some of the strength it had lost over several days. Sneasel's claws tightened around the bottle it still held. The choice loomed: stay wild and hungry, or risk the unknown comfort of humans for immediate, delicious strength. Chapter 146, Battle with Sneasel, seeing first subscription. Honestly, Aoki had a real headache facing this Sneasel. As a dark ice type, it was weak to a lot of things on paper, but when he thought it through, he realized he didn't have many Pokémon that could hit it effectively. The only moves that would do neutral damage were Honchkro's flying moves, Slowpoke's water moves, and Ghastly's poison moves. Only Miltank wasn't weak to Sneasel. Slowpoke's best psychic attacks were useless against dark types. Honchkro's dark moves were resisted. Ghastly's ghost moves fared even worse. All of this made him want to prioritize teaching Slowpoke Miracle Eye. In the game, Slowpoke couldn't normally learn Miracle Eye, but this was the real world, not a game. With the right method, there was still a chance. In his previous life, Aoki had learned such a method from a semi-elite 4 trainer who taught Miracle Eye to his psychic Pokémon. He'd paid a high price for it, planning to develop a powerful psychic attacker, but Rebirth had cut that plan short. Slowpoke needed Miracle Eye, or it would be helpless against dark types. Water could help, but Psychic was Slowpoke's specialty. Water was only supplementary. The situation showed that even though Sneasel was supposedly vulnerable to many things, it was still dangerous to trainers without a rounded team. Sneasel. In the end, Sneasel couldn't resist Aoki's 2 bottles of milk. It had no real choice. The escape routes had been blocked. Even if it didn't want to fight, it would have to. If it won, at least it would get the milk. Carefully, it set the half-drunk bottle on the ground and screwed the cap back on, guarding it like a prized possession. Don't worry, I won't touch your milk. Aoki looked at Sneasel and felt an odd twinge in his chest. He saw a reflection of his former self in that defensive posture. When he'd first come to this world, he'd been an orphan with no parents. The unfamiliar surroundings and the constant feeling of being out of place had nearly broken him. Before Team Rocket seized him for experiments, he used to scavenge through trash heaps just to find food. Surviving was all that mattered. He never dared imagine becoming a trainer. People would often try to steal whatever he had. Back then, his instinct to protect what little he owned must have looked a lot like Sneasel's behavior now. That period had shown him another side of this world, the dark underside beneath the Pokémon Utopia veneer. Shaking the memory away, he reminded himself this wasn't the time for sentiment. To control his destiny, he had to be stronger. He would capture this Sneasel, by whatever means necessary, and whether it stayed with him afterward didn't matter. For now, he was going to catch it. Sneasel, not trusting the stranger who had barged into its den and declared battle, was tense. Miru. Miltank stepped in and lowed softly a few times, trying to calm things, but Sneasel waved a paw to cut her off. It didn't dislike Miltank. There was a faint sense of kinship from her scent, but if Miltank was siding with the intruder, Sneasel wouldn't listen. Enough, Sneasel said with a cold look, and turned to face Aoki squarely, its front paws pressed to its chest and its gaze as emotionless and deadly as a killer's. Honchkro, Slowpoke, go together, Aoki ordered. Sneasel was higher level and had better aptitude than either Honchkro or Slowpoke, plus the type edge. Any one of them alone would likely lose. Even together, it wouldn't be easy. But they had the advantage of teamwork, and after following Aoki and using energy cubes for so long, there were strengths that numbers and levels didn't show. Sneasel moved first. Its foreclaws scraped together over its chest, producing an unpleasant metallic sound as the blades grew sharper. Hone claws. increasing attack and accuracy. Honchkrow, snatch! Thanks to Honchkrow's prankster ability, which gives status moves priority, it could get a status move off before Sneasel's boost took hold. Aoki's voice cut through the tense air, and faint black light coiled around Sneasel's claws. Sneasel, mid-rub, felt the effect vanish. Its hone claws seemed to fail. Instead, the stolen effect flashed over to Honchkrow. Its own claws glinted sharper than before. Honchkrow, Tailwind. Help Slowpoke move faster. Slowpoke, Water Gun. While Sneasel was still reeling, Aoki barked the attack commands. Honchkrow beat its wings, and a rush of flying-type energy blew around them. This Tailwind wasn't just for itself. This time, Slowpoke would benefit too. Slowpoke felt lighter as the gust lifted it, and following Aoki's order, spat a stream of water straight at Sneasel. Sneasel moved fast. It dodged the water gun with a quick sidestep and then sprang forward, aiming to close the distance. If Slowpoke got trapped at point-blank range, the consequences could be dire. Slowbro used Psychic to control that water gun. Honchkrow wing attack. Yadan. Slowbro's eyes glowed blue. The water gun it had just fired swung in a smooth arc and came back on a U-turn under Psychic control. Psychic moves can't damage Sneasel, but they can still manipulate attacks, and Sneasel hadn't expected the evaded shot to reverse. Running forward, it was too late to dodge and took the water gun full on. The blast wasn't powerful. The water gun was redirected by Psychic, but it was enough to make Sneasel stagger. Honchkrow, boosted by Tailwind, dove at the faltering Sneasel, wings charged with flying energy. Normally, a Pokemon slowed or constrained like Sneasel wouldn't be able to avoid an accelerated wing attack, but this time, Honchkrow's strike missed. Sneasel flickered, flashing that familiar black sheen, and slipped past Honchkrow's wing. Quick attack. Sneasel didn't bother with Honchkrow. It locked onto Slowbro instead. There was an aura about Slowbro that Sneasel hated. From years surviving and fighting in the wild, it knew if its claw connected that pink Pokemon would pay dearly. Aoki's face was grave. Sneasel was too fast. The speed advantage Honchkrow usually enjoyed was gone, even with Tailwind. Honchkrow, Hidden Power. Slowbro, Headbutt. Honchkrow hesitated. Using Hidden Power now might hit Slowbro too, but it trusted Aoki absolutely. It trusted that command and formed a yellow orb crackling with faint blue electricity. Sneasel closed in on Slowbro and lunged, teeth threaded with dark energy. Bite. Dark moves hit psychic types hard. Slowbro didn't dodge. Aoki had told it to answer with Headbutt, and as his Pokemon, it trusted him completely. A thin sheen of unknown energy gathered on its smooth, round head, and it rammed into Sneasel's jaws. The two collided with a muffled boom, both shoved back. Yadan! Slowbro cried. Of the two, Slowbro had taken the worst hit. Dark against Psychic was too effective. Aoki's expression didn't change. The damage was expected. He had chosen not to protect because he had a larger plan. Sneasel, teeth ringing from Slowbro's headbutt, recovered and charged again. It had taken a hit, but it believed Sneasel had taken worse. Honchkrow finished charging its hidden power. The yellow orb brightened, lighting the cave. Sneasel, bite again. Slowbro, protect. Honchkrow, unleash hidden power. In an almost simultaneous clash, Sneasel's bite, Slowbro's protect, and Honchkrow's hidden power all happened at once. Sneasel's fangs struck the green dome of Slowbro's protect and could not break through. Honchkrow's electric-type hidden power slammed into both Pokemon and detonated, sending yellow and blue currents outward. Slowbro's protect absorbed both attacks and emerged unscathed. Without protect, the electric hidden power would have hit it hard, no less than Sneasel's bite had. Sneasel was not so lucky. The hidden power struck its center mass and blasted it 3 meters back. It still had water on its fur from the earlier water gun, and the moisture amplified the electric damage. The faint twitch of electricity across its fur made clear Honchkrow's hidden power had done severe harm. Sneasel staggered, then steadied. Blue energy coalesced on its claws and half-fist-sized ice shards formed. It fired them at Slowbro. Ice against water is weakened, but ice doubles against flying. With the range and Honchkrow's speed, Sneasel hoped to strike Slowbro while Honchkrow dodged, or at least to wear them down. Aoki didn't let him. Slowbro, hidden power. Honchkrow, sucker punch. Getting close. As a water type, Slowbro's hidden power bizarrely took on fire typing. Before the ice shards neared, the fire orb materializing in front of Slowbro melted them instantly. The tiny shards turned to puddles. Honchkrow used Sucker Punch while Sneasel's eyes were on the fire orb and the melted ice. Suddenly it lunged, seized Sneasel, and tangled with it. Bound together, they traded blows bare-handed. Sneasel's raw attack power was higher, but Honchkrow had Hone Claw's earlier boost, so its talons bit hard. Slowbro's hidden power finished charging. Aoki let it go. He pushed the fire orb forward, directing it at the two grappling enemies. Sneasel. The incoming fire's heat made Sneasel panic, but Honchkrow clung on tight to keep it from dodging. A mutual knockout seemed likely. Honchkrow would be hit too. If Honchkrow had known Aoki's thoughts at that moment, it would have been less worried. Aoki only had one thought flashing through his mind. Protect is so useful. The 15th update is complete. Now it's time to pay off debts. Please subscribe. Please support with monthly passes. Chapter 148, The Goddess of Dawns. Extra chapter for the first 10,000 coin reward. Eat my chubby stick. Murkrow, protect. As Slowpoke unleashed its fire-type hidden power and the flaming orb rose into the air, Aoki barked the command. Caw! Murkrow, already entangled with Sneasel, felt the heat of the incoming energy and immediately used Protect. The blast of heat struck the battlefield. Sneasel, an ice-type, felt it even more keenly than Murkrow. Murkrow's Protect blocked the damage, but Sneasel had no shield. The fiery energy ball slammed into the center of the skirmish. Boom! The explosion sent a burst of heat and flame outward. The temperature in the cave climbed. Ice around the blast melted. The pooled water at the center hissed and vaporized into steam. A thick mist rolled through the cave. Murkrow flew out of the cloud unharmed, flapping to clear the smoke and steam. Sneasel's fur was singed, and it lay limp where the explosion had hit, unable to move. Aoki looked at the fallen Sneasel and smiled. Stop playing dead. I know you haven't used everything you've got. Get up. Any ordinary trainer might have believed Sneasel was finished. Getting close to a seemingly defeated Pokémon can be deadly. Those last desperate strikes are often the most dangerous. But Aoki had been monitoring Sneasel's condition through the chip. He knew Sneasel was exhausted but still capable of one more attack. Sneasel. Seeing that Aoki had read him, Sneasel stopped pretending. It struggled to prop itself up, swaying as it rose. Aoki grinned. He was pleased, not just because Sneasel was strong, but because it was clever. A wild Pokémon that learned to use its head had a better chance of survival, and Sneasel clearly knew how to fight with its mind. Take a rest, Sneasel. Slowpoke, yawn. Aoki didn't want Sneasel to overexert itself further. He could heal it later, but pushing a wild Pokémon past its limits could stunt its future growth. Slowpoke exhaled, and an oval bubble drifted from its nose and floated toward the unsteady Sneasel. Pop! When the bubble burst, Sneasel's strength evaporated. An overwhelming drowsiness settled over it. Its eyelids grew heavy, and its limbs went slack. As it sagged, its half-open eyes flicked toward a half-finished bottle of milk in the corner. For a moment, there was a flash of reluctance and loss. My milk. With a final thud, Sneasel collapsed, utterly incapable of fighting. Slowpoke's yawn had been the final straw. Aoki immediately threw a great ball. The ball shook a few times. Then, with the flash of the central button, it stopped. Rather than have a Pokémon bring the ball back, Aoki walked over to the scorched ground and picked up the great ball himself. This victory had been the result of careful teamwork, Murkrow and Slowpoke, and Aoki's precise commands. Without Aoki's strategy, even a strong Murkrow and Slowpoke might have lost to a type-advantaged Sneasel. Still, both had taken a beating. Fortunately, Miltank arrived in time with fresh milk to restore stamina. Aoki took several potions from his ring and treated Murkrow and Slowpoke, spraying them to soothe burns and relieve pain. He fed them energy cubes to replenish their energy. Between Miltank's milk, potions for wounds, and energy cubes for stamina, they recovered quickly. When the battlefield had calmed, Aoki released Sneasel from the Great Ball. It was awake but too hurt to move. Fear and hostility glittered in its eyes as it took in Aoki and the two Pokémon around it. Aoki knelt without a word and began treating Sneasel's burns, paralysis, and bruises with his best potion spray. Sneasel! The Pokémon tried to scramble up when it saw Aoki reach for something, expecting the worst. The motion pulled at its injuries and it collapsed back down. Don't move. Lie still, Aoki said, serious, and continued his treatment. Sneasel's wounds were bad and its condition had been weakened by a hard life. Before this, it had kept fighting by sheer will. Now that will had ebbed, and movement was difficult. Aoki's steady hands and the potions sped its recovery. The coolness of the medicine mixed with the pain of returning sensation in its numb muscles, Sneasel felt both hurt and relief for the first time. Miltank squatted beside Sneasel with the half-finished bottle of milk, fit a straw into it, and held the other end up to Sneasel's mouth. The familiar scent reached Sneasel, and its eyes widened as it watched Miltank's shy, smiling face. After a moment's hesitation, Sneasel couldn't resist. It latched onto the straw and drank greedily. In Sneasel's eyes at that moment, Miltank glowed with a sacred radiance. Goddess of Dawn's milk? Today's 15 chapters are done. This is a long overdue debt I'm finally paying back. There are still a few more 10,000 coin rewards from big bosses to settle, and I'll repay those slowly. Also, please subscribe for the first chapter. Please subscribe. Please subscribe. Time's almost up. Everyone, please give me that first subscription. Chapter 149, Miltank's Tongue-Tied, 14. Sneasel surprisingly relaxed under treatment and the steady stream of milk. It ate without complaint and let Aoki work on its injuries, but the process left Aoki exhausted. Never underestimate a breeder's methods. When treating Pokémon, a combination of healing medicine and specific handling techniques can not only speed recovery and ease pain, but also help tissues knit together faster. Pokémon bodies are tougher than humans, so Aoki's massage plus salves had already sealed some wounds and erased smaller cuts. With a bottle of Miltank's milk, Sneasel could stand on its own and make small movements by the time he finished. Only then did Sneasel truly look at the man in front of it with new eyes. Aoki didn't look imposing, calm, composed, but Sneasel remembered the battle. Much of why Honchkrow and Slowpoke had beaten it was because of this human's commands. It stared at Aoki with mixed emotions. Aoki met its gaze without flinching. "Sneasel," he said plainly, "you're mine now, whether you want it or not. You have two choices." He let the pause hang, then continued. "First, you become my Pokémon. I'll help you grow and train. You'll have milk, good food, items. You'll be able to fight and get stronger." Sneasel's face stayed impassive until Aoki mentioned milk. For a heartbeat, something like longing flickered across its expression before it clamped down on it. Aoki noticed. A smile tugged at him. Once you find something a Pokémon truly wants, half the battle of taming is won. But Aoki's expression hardened when he reached the second option. He fixed Sneasel with a cold stare. "Second, if you refuse to fight for me, I won't force you to. I'll keep feeding you, but you'll never leave your Pokeball again. Ever, until you die." Those were essentially life or a living prison. A Pokeball is a cell, kept inside forever. For a wild Pokemon that prized freedom above all, the idea of being locked away for life was worse than death. Sneasel's reaction was immediate. "Sneasel," it cried, lunging into an attack stance. Better to die than be caged, it seemed to say. Slowpoke and Honchkrow mirrored the stance, eyes narrowed and ready, wary of any sudden move. Aoki, however, did not back down. As a trainer with a strong desire to control his team, he couldn't compromise here. He had seen Sneasel's potential, excellent aptitude, solid fighting style, and fierce will. If it wouldn't become a key Pokémon for him, he wouldn't let it roam free where someone else could catch it and turn it against him. Locking it away was a last resort. Selling it to the Hunter Guild was even less desirable, a choice reserved only for desperation. But if Sneasel fought for him, it would be treated well, just like Slowpoke and the others. At that tense standoff, it was Miltank who barged in, placing herself between Aoki and Sneasel. She waved her hooves emphatically, clearly trying to tell Sneasel that Aoki wasn't what it feared. At the same time, she grabbed the half-empty bottle of milk Sneasel had set aside and shoved it toward the Sneasel. "Miru," Miltank chattered constantly. Sneasel, she cooed as Sneasel, bewildered, accepted the bottle. She got more animated, pulling in a just as bewildered Slowpoke and patting its back so hard it winced, but Slowpoke didn't dare move away. Honchkrow watched Miltank battering Slowpoke and felt a quiet relief that it wasn't on the receiving end. Slowpoke, teeth clenched, tried to put on a happy, persuasive face, crooning and calling to keep the mood calm. Sneasel watched Miltank's excited explanations and the expression of pain on Slowpoke's face, and a small, spiteful satisfaction crept through it. Those two had ganged up on it earlier, after all. Miltank, oblivious to Sneasel's amusement, only grew more enthusiastic. Her pats grew stronger and stronger until Slowpoke could no longer bear it. Then bang! Miltank's hoof came down with such force that the ground dented beneath it, spiderwebbing with fine cracks. The sudden, thunderous impact sucked the air out of the clearing. Miltank, finishing whatever point she'd been making, blinked and looked around, sheepish as if nothing had happened. Two heavy gulps sounded, one from Slowpoke in relief at stepping back in time, and another from Sneasel, refusing to admit it had once thought Miltank unimpressive. Aoki was surprised too. He'd assumed the power Miltank displayed against the Arbok had been an endure-boosted fluke, but there was clearly some other strength there. Whatever she'd said, Miltank's long speech had worked. Sneasel's hostility ebbed, its stance lowered. It was rare to see such a compact, pregnant effect from Miltank's unorthodox mediation, but as the only female among the group, she'd proved effective. After a moment of silence, Miltank guided the now-appeasing Sneasel forward to stand before Aoki. Whether by coaxing, argument, or a simple bribe of milk, she'd turned a blatant rebel into something that at least looked obedient. Aoki had no intention of locking Sneasel up now. His earlier threat had been partly bluff, but he still reached out to pat its head, hoping to seal the truce. "Sneasel," he said gently. Sneasel, however, ducked its head away, avoiding the pat. Aoki's hand hovered awkwardly. He didn't pull it back. Instead, he reached into his ring, produced 2 more bottles of milk, and placed them both into Sneasel's arms. Under its reluctant, complicated expression, Aoki still pressed his hand to its head and ruffled its fur twice with a broad, satisfied smile. "I owe a lot of updates. First, I'll keep the daily 4 updates now that we've passed 1,000 first subscriptions. Please vote, collect, recommend, and send all kinds of support. Thank you. Thanks to Big Boss Tianhao Yu for the 50,000 reward. I owe 5 updates. Thanks to Big Boss Wang Qingwu for the 12,000 reward. I owe 1 update. Thanks to Big Boss Hongju New Pai CC for the 11,100 reward. I owe 1 update. Thanks to Big Boss Sen Zixing for the 11,000 reward. I owe 1 update. Thanks to Big Boss Shichin for the 11,000 reward. I owe 1 update. Thanks to Big Boss Xiao Mingming for the 10,000 reward. I owe 1 update. Thanks to Big Boss Satan's Undead Mage for the 10,000 reward. I owe 1 update. Thanks to Big Boss Mingri Rushui for the 10,000 reward. I owe 1 update. These are all the rewards I need to write updates for. There are so many that I can't name everyone individually here, but I see you all. Thank you for your support. And thanks to everyone reading at Book City. I can't see you all, but I appreciate every one of you." Chapter 150, Finding a Swinub, Descriptions. By now, Aoki had finally subdued Sneasel. It wasn't completely obedient yet, but he was confident that with time and steady interaction, it would become part of the team. Of all his Pokemon, Sneasel was closest to Miltank. Whether that was because Miltank had left a good impression or simply because of the milk was unclear. Sneasel still kept a measure of wariness toward Aoki. It would follow his commands, but there was a trace of resistance in its eyes. Murkrow and Slowpoke, however, acted as if no grudge existed at all. They constantly rubbed against Sneasel, even though they had been the ones to beat it before. At first, Sneasel met their attentions with cold suspicion, but Murkrow and the others were shamelessly persistent, and bit by bit Sneasel accepted their presence. Aoki didn't take Sneasel's reserve personally. After all, he'd been the one to lead his Pokemon to beat it and threaten it. Getting it to give up resistance and accept becoming his Pokemon was already a big step. He knew Pokemon didn't just flock to a trainer overnight. Everything took time. Chasing Sneasel all day had been hard work, but the result was well worth it. Inside the ice cave, there was no sunlight, but Aoki's watch said it was already 7 in the evening and none of the Pokemon had eaten. They set about making a meal, piling stones to make a hearth and setting a large pot on top. Aoki sliced the meat, added vegetables, seasonings, and a few homemade condiments. Simple, but a hearty hot pot. The rich steam and smell drew his Pokemon instinctively. Sneasel hesitated at first, but Miltank nudged it toward the fire until it reluctantly settled down. Eating hot pot in an ice cave seemed oddly fitting. The meal warmed their bodies and, more importantly, brought them together. As they ate, Sneasel, previously stiff and withdrawn, started to relax, eating faster and interacting more with the others. After a while, Aoki joined them. The cold cave, once quiet and empty, became lively and warm. One hot pot had done more to build bonds than a week of scolding ever could. After the meal, they each had a bottle of milk and sat side by side against the cave wall, chatting quietly. Aoki woke Gligar to give it some milk. Gligar was curious about the new team member and even crawled over to greet Sneasel, who looked awkwardly unsure how to respond. They pitched tents in the cave and spent the first night together since Sneasel had joined. The next morning, after packing up, Aoki asked Sneasel, who was perched aloofly beside him, "Sneasel, you've lived here a long time? Have you ever seen any swinub?" They'd rested in the cave overnight and set out early to search for a swinub with decent aptitude and level to complete the Hunter Guild's mission. Finding Sneasel had been luck and stubborn pursuit, but the main goal remained a good swinub. Sneasel listened to the question, paused, then nodded. It couldn't remember exactly how long it had lived in the caverns, but it never forgot where the good food was. It had a strong impression of swinub, not just because they were common here, but because swinub liked to hoard food, piling it up and living off it without moving much. Whenever Sneasel found a swinub, it found a food source. Sometimes the swinub would be strong defenders. If Sneasel tried to steal, angry swinub could be terrifying on their own turf in the ice cave. That made Sneasel careful about which ones it led others to. Knowing this saved Aoki a lot of blind searching. Under Sneasel's guidance, they began moving through the labyrinth of caverns. There were plenty of swinub, but the caves were many and complex, and swinub wandered. After 2 hours, they hadn't found many suitable ones. Aoki passed on the weaker or lower aptitude swinub. Sneasel, once it knew Aoki's standards, stopped taking them to places where weak swinub lived. After another hour, in a remote chamber deep in the ice, they finally found one that fit Aoki's requirements. Pokemon Swinub Deep Yellow. Gender, female, level 22. Type Ice Ground. Ability, Oblivious. Held item, none. Egg moves, Icicle Spear, Mudshot. Base moves, Tackle, Mud Slap, Powder Snow, Mudshot, Endure Mud Bomb, Icy Wind. Learned moves, Stealth Rock, none. Deep Yellow Aptitude and level 22. Catching it would complete Aoki's hunter mission. He didn't hesitate. Slowpoke, use Water Gun. There was no need for everyone to attack together for such a normal swinub. Besides, Ice-type moves would be super effective against Murkrow's Flying type, so Aoki chose Slowpoke for the task. Yedon. A steady jet of water surged from Slowpoke's mouth toward the alcove where the swinub nested. The normally lazy swinub, true to its oblivious nature, hadn't noticed them at first. As long as it wasn't disturbed, it left others alone. It certainly hadn't expected someone to come for it. The stream of water hit before it could react, rushing into the nest and instantly flooding its little home. Polly. Chapter 151, Searching for Onyx, Seeking Scriptions and Monthly Tickets. The Mamoswine that had been enjoying its quiet life suddenly exploded in fury. It was naturally slow and lazy, but that didn't mean it could be bullied without consequence. In this icy cavern, its strength mattered, otherwise it wouldn't have been able to guard so much food. With an angry roar, it lunged out of the pool, eyes bloodshot, fixed on the Slowpoke that had wrecked its home. Slowpoke, keep using Water Gun. Bolster it with Psychic, Aoki ordered, pressing the attack. Another jet of water spat from Slowpoke's mouth. This time, a thin sheath of psychic energy surrounded the stream, increasing its speed and boosting its power slightly. The psychic field also let Slowpoke steer the shot. It couldn't bend like before, but it could adjust direction without losing force. The Mamoswine watched the water streak toward it and felt instinctive resistance to the water-type energy. As a ground type, it hated water. Its little tail twitched and the fur along its back shivered. A cold breath carrying fine snow issued from its mouth. That was Icy Wind. Facing the incoming water gun head-on, the Mamoswine unleashed it. Inside the ice cave, the ambient cold amplified ice moves by a good 30%, and the front of Slowpoke's water gun began to frost over. Aoki's thought that by the time it reached the Mamoswine, its effectiveness would be greatly reduced, or at least the super effective hit the water gun could land would be significantly blunted. But things didn't go the Mamoswine's way. The blue light in Slowpoke's eyes flared, and the psychic shell around the water gun solidified, accelerating the stream even more. To the beast's surprise, the water gun struck true. The frozen tip made the blast feel like a piercing arrow, aggravating the pain of the hit, like picking up a rock only to drop it on your own foot. "Polly," the Mamoswine yelped. Slowpoke didn't miss the opening. Without needing more prompting from Aoki's, it fired several more psychic-augmented water jets. The Mamoswine was lumbering and not particularly well defended. Under continuous water gun fire, it couldn't mount an effective counterattack and quickly lost the fight. Slowpoke's water moves were doubly effective against ground types, and the psychic augmentation left the Mamoswine no room to resist. The whole skirmish was over with little suspense. The Mamoswine wasn't a social Pokemon, so Aoki's and his team had little trouble dealing with an opponent of that temperament and level. He caught it in a regular Pokeball, then used a few potions to make sure it wouldn't die from its injuries. Sneasel watched the whole thing, studying how Aoki's treated other Pokemon versus how he'd been treated. For some reason, it felt a little pleased. Maybe sometimes there's no harm in comparisons. After capturing the Mamoswine, Aoki's decided not to go deeper into the ice cave. The farther in they went, the colder it became. Even with his down jacket, the cold was beginning to bite. Besides Miltank, whose thick fat made it fine in the cold, and Sneasel, who was at home in this environment, the rest of the team struggled. Honchkrow looked like it could barely flap its wings in the chill. Aoki's took note, but also saw a training opportunity. Though training in the cave would drain stamina faster, the cold would be excellent for building Honchkrow's resistance to ice-type attacks. As they made their way back toward the cave mouth, Aoki's asked Sneasel if it knew where Onyx might be. Sneasel only knew the cave's interior and the small patch of forest right outside its own den. Beyond that, it had no idea. The area was vast, and it couldn't range very far each day. Since Sneasel didn't know Onyx's whereabouts, Aoki's gave up searching the cave. It seemed unlikely Onyx would make a home this deep in the ice. Stepping out into the open air made him realize how cold it had been inside. After letting his hands and feet thaw a little, Aoki sent Miltank back into its Pokeball and set out to search the mountain slopes. Rocky terrain up to the foothills was the sort of place Onyx might be found, so he planned to spend the afternoon and the next morning looking. If he found nothing, he'd have to put the search on hold. Shadow's mission had already been delayed, and Aoki's was worried about the Alliance's surprise strike on the Rocket Team base. Whenever it came, he didn't have much time to waste. The mountain path was treacherous. Each step over jagged stone demanded care. A single misstep could mean a fall. Honchkrow and Slowpoke were less hindered. One could fly, the other used psychic power to move over the rough ground as if it were level. Sneasel, comfortable on this terrain and quick-footed, moved fastest of all. They passed many Geodude and Golem along the way. Most were docile. After a brief glance at Aoki's group, they went back to their important business, gnawing on rocks. Diglets and Sandshrews also appeared. The Diglets paid them no mind, but the Sandshrews were more mischievous and sometimes mounted group attacks. Slowpoke's water guns quickly dealt with them. A few managed to flee, but most were cut down. Despite the size of the mountain, Aoki's found no trace of Onyx. He sent Honchkrow high above to scout, but multiple sorties turned up nothing. Logically, a Pokemon as large as Onyx, even if it was rolled up among boulders, should be visible from the air. Yet Honchkrow simply couldn't spot it. Aoki's could only hope maybe Onyx would show up somewhere Honchkrow couldn't see. As the sun sank and the last light faded, Aoki's led his team into a small, clean rock shelter. After a quick tidy, it became their camp for the night. This is the third update today. I promised to do 4 updates a day after reaching over 1,000 first subscriptions, and I'll keep my word. The last update might be a little late. Seeing how hard I'm working, please send some monthly tickets. Rewards, recommendation tickets, anything would be great. Chapter 152, Unexpected Discovery, Subscriptions, Monthly Passes. By the time dawn barely touched the eastern sky, Aomuki was already awake. He prepared breakfast for the Pokemon and called them to get up. Only Sneasel seemed a little out of the habit. In truth, when Aomuki first woke, Sneasel had been awake too, but since the others were still asleep, he hadn't given any sign. Now, though, when Aomuki called everyone for breakfast, he found himself thinking, am I slowly settling into this? I don't seem to mind it as much as I thought. A small voice in his head kept insisting he wasn't a good person and shouldn't give in, and his mouth said no, but his body was honest. The neatly arranged breakfast smelled inviting, and a cup of fresh milk sat ready where Aomuki had placed it. All the Pokémon took their places and looked at him, waiting for him to join them. His feet rose, and he went to the spot reserved for him. Seeing his food up close made him swallow. He wanted to start right away, but no one else had begun eating, so he held back. "Dig in, everyone," Aomuki said with a smile, catching a glimpse of a slightly flustered Sneasel out of the corner of his eye. At his words, the Pokémon began to eat, and Sneasel, a beat behind, followed. It ate faster and faster. The food tasted better and better. When Aomuki stroked its head midway through the meal, Sneasel half ignored him. Typical honest body behavior. After breakfast, they resumed the search for Onyx. Aomuki had set today as the last full day to keep looking. If they failed by lunchtime, he would have to give up. Instead of climbing higher, they searched horizontally at a steady altitude so they'd have enough time to return. Along the way, many mountain Pokémon couldn't resist challenging Aomuki's team, but Slowpoke handled most of them easily. The mountain was full of rock and ground types. Slowpoke's water-type moves were especially effective. Although rock types had high defense, they were poorly resistant to water attacks. After dispatching a lot of troublesome rock and ground Pokémon, Slowpoke gained a level and reached 25, tying with Sneasel as the highest-level Pokémon in Aomuki's party. Even if they didn't find Onyx, that single level made the trip worthwhile. Good leveling spots like this were rare. They searched for almost 2 hours with no sign of Onyx or any places one might live. Just as Aomuki was about to give up, Murkrow told him there was a sizable cave ahead that might hide an Onyx. Aomuki followed and found a 2-person-high cave entrance with obvious crushing marks at the mouth, tracks that resembled those an Onyx might leave. Slowpoke, use water gun into the cave and see if there's anything inside. The possibility of Onyx was high, but not certain. Apart from those crushing marks, there were no other signs. Slowpoke fired a stream of water into the dark. The cave was deep. The water traveled a long way before the sound of dripping returned. After a few silent seconds at the entrance, faint, chaotic noises echoed back, slow at first, then gradually getting closer. Aomuki frowned. This isn't right. If it were an Onyx, the racket would be bigger, and it doesn't sound like something dragging itself. It sounds like tires scraping the ground. They didn't have to wait long. A flat, blue-gray cylinder, like a massive tire, rolled out at speed, grinding against the stones as it came. Aomuki's pupils narrowed and he yelled, "Get out of the way!" He threw himself against the cave wall, barely avoiding the rolling cylinder. The others darted aside. The cylinder skidded furiously on the rock until it finally stopped. Those crushing marks at the entrance were made that way. Donphan! Where the cylinder had been, a stout, elephant-like Pokémon stood, a little over a meter tall on its legs, dark blue armored hide from tail to snout, 2 thick white tusks protruding from its cheeks, and small eyes set beneath the armor. It was a Donphan, the Johto region evolution of Phanpy, a ground-type Pokémon. Pokémon Donphan potential, light green, gender male, level 25, type ground ability sturdy, held item none egg moves, mud slap, focus energy, body slam. Basic moves, Fire Fang, Thunder Fang, Horn Attack, Stomp, Growl, Defense Curl, Rapid Spin, Rollout, Assurance, Knockoff, Slam THM moves, Iron Defense, Stealth Rock, Block. A level 25 Donphan with light green potential was unexpected. They hadn't seen many Pokémon with yellow potential on the way, much less green. The level implied it had only recently evolved, which was a relief to Aomuki. He didn't want to face a level 30 Donphan that already knew Magnitude. That move's area of effect, completely random strength, could have buried them under a landslide in this rocky terrain. Since this Donphan hadn't learned Magnitude yet, it was a valuable catch. If he captured it, he could exchange it for a good haul of Hunter's Guild points later. Donphan, of course, had no idea these intruders who'd poured water into its cave were already sizing it up as profit. Aomuki didn't have time to waste. Slowpoke, Water Gun, Murkrow, Tailwind, Boost, Sneasel, Icy Wind. This was Sneasel's first battle under Aomuki's command. Its movements were a little slow at first, but it reacted quickly enough and seemed to understand Aomuki's intent. 4 updates daily. First day's tasks completed, but Jinmu is drowning in debt and can't sleep, so he's keeping at it. Given how hard I'm working, how about a bunch of monthly passes, rewards, recommendation tickets? Chapter 153, Giving Up the Search, Seeking Subscriptions Monthly Passes, 4th. Murkrow's prankster ability let status moves gain increased priority. It was a game mechanic, but it worked much the same in the real world. After Murkrow used Tailwind, Aoki's whole team felt lighter, as if a breeze had pushed them forward. Slowpoke immediately fired a water gun. Sneasel, a little slower to react, understood Aoki's plan and let out Icy Wind, not aimed straight at Donphan, but timed to meet the water gun. That kept the water from freezing solid and preserved the wind's effect. Tiny shards of ice formed inside the jet, mixing ice energy with water energy. It wasn't a perfect fusion, but it was their first attempt and already better than Aoki had expected. The water gun, laced with ice, struck Donphan squarely. Kuba! Donphan, a ground type, was doubly weak to water and ice. The combined attack hit harder than usual, making it howl in pain. Its eyes flashed red. It had been dozing in its cave, a grumpy late riser, when a sudden spray of water hit its face and startled it awake. It looked around for an ambusher and, finding nothing, stormed out to vent its irritation. Just as it stopped rolling, an even colder jet, shot through with ice, hit it again. That was the last straw. Donphan exhaled 2 thick breaths through its trunk, stamped its front hooves, and without hesitation, curled into a wheel. Its armor, thick and tire-like, scattered pebbles and dust as it rolled. Its 2 huge tusks jutted like spears on either side. Rollout had begun. Rollout's initial power was modest, but with each turn the force doubled until it could reach 480 power. If used after Defense Curl, it could double again to a terrifying 960. Aoki remembered Akane from Goldenrod City and how her family had studied Rollout closely. How, unlike most users who couldn't easily start or stop the move, they developed techniques to control it. Donphan's rampage was just beginning, and as its speed increased, it would soon be very hard to redirect. Aoki didn't like brawny Pokémon who only charged forward and never used their heads. His Pokémon also disliked such fights. It felt like bullying a lumbering oaf and brought little satisfaction. Calmly, he gave his commands. Slowpoke, use Psychic to shape the water gun into a bubble. Sneasel, keep using Icy Wind to slow him down. Murkrow, Dark Pulse, disrupt the ground around him. Donphan had only just started rolling, so its power was still manageable. Sneasel let loose another blast of Icy Wind, this time full strength to chill Donphan's body and slow its momentum. Frost crept over the armor, shaving off speed. Murkrow's Dark Pulse wasn't aimed to hurt Donphan directly so much as to upheave the terrain around it, making the ground uneven and further hampering its roll. Slowpoke, as the main damage dealer, fired Water Gun and then immediately used Psychic to take control of the water. Rather than letting the jet hit directly, Slowpoke waited until its teammates had reduced Donphan's momentum, then Psychic wrapped the Pokémon in a globe of water. The rolling stopped. Donphan was trapped in the water ball and began to thrash, its tiny eyes widening as it struggled to breathe. Sneasel, Icy Wind, freeze it solid, Aoki said, watching the trapped Donphan with a small smile. Sneasel nodded and poured ice energy into the water globe. The ball turned to a block of solid ice with Donphan frozen stiff inside. Apart from its eyeballs, which still rolled faintly, it lay completely immobile. It might have looked dead, if not for the shallow breaths it still drew. Aoki couldn't help but admire Donphan's constitution. Even in such a suffocating state, it could manage to move its eyes. After a moment, Aoki had his team shatter the ice. Donphan lay rigid on the ground, utterly unable to move. He threw a Pokeball, caught it, then let it sit in the sun for a while to recover before sealing it away and switching on the lock. With Donphan caught, Aoki felt content and resumed his search for Onix. His mood had shifted. This light green Donphan was worth more to him than an ordinary Onix. If he didn't find one, he could accept that. But 2 hours more of searching turned up nothing. He'd reached his self-imposed deadline and decided to give up, hoping to find an Onix some other time. Leading his Pokémon down the mountainside, Aoki learned something simple but true. Going up a mountain was easy. Coming down was hard. The slope was strewn with broken rock, and the careful steps required on the ascent felt almost effortless compared to the cautious, slow approach needed for a descent. Eventually, he had Slowpoke use Psychic to smooth a path so they could make better time. He'd avoided relying on its power for travel recently because he wanted to train alongside his team. Lately, his Pokémon were advancing fast, but his own fitness was lagging. He needed to train harder so he wouldn't be a burden in the wild. As his pace quickened, faint sounds of battle reached him from partway down the slope, Pokémon moves and human voices giving commands. There are still trainers out here? A girl's voice too? Aoki wondered, turning toward the noise. Well, this is the first update for today. There will be 4 regular updates, and then I'll try to catch up 2 or 3 backlog chapters. 6 or 7 chapters in a day. Yeah, I'm really pushing myself. Please send monthly passes, rewards, recommendation tickets, collections, or reviews. Anything helps. Please support me. Chapter 54, Conflict Arises. Finding a trainer out here in such a remote place meant that trainer had to be strong. Aoki and his Pokémon moved quietly, muffling their footsteps as they crept toward the source of the noise. The sounds of battle grew louder, a deep rumble, the crash of flying sand and stones against the mountainside. Then a clear voice pierced the din. Roserade, use Stun Spore! The scene unfolded before Aoki. 2 Onix, the very ones he'd been searching for, were entangled here, each about 9 meters long, winding together like living boulders. Terrain that had been treacherous to Aoki was like flat ground to them. After they passed, the smashed rubble settled, and the path smoothed. But it wasn't the Onix that drew his attention most. It was the girl standing before them. A red bandana tied at her forehead, a denim jacket and slim jeans, flanked by a strange green Pokémon. Roserade, small and elegant, with 3 thorns on its head and leaves like a dress. It held a blue rose in its left hand and a red one in its right. At the girl's command, Roserade spoke a few crisp syllables, raised its roses, and released a cloud of fine purple spores that drifted toward the 2 Onix. The giant serpents were immense. Though Stun Spore affected them, it only slowed them slightly. The girl didn't flinch. She watched the charging Onix calmly and moved with easy agility across the broken ground, which posed no obstacle to her. Roserade, Magical Leaf, Mismagius, Confuse Ray, she called while dashing about. From the shadows, a Mismagius suddenly drifted into view and launched a small orb of eerie light at one of the Onix. Roserade spun and flung its roses. A flurry of glowing green leaves struck the nearest Onix. Grass-type moves were devastating to rock-ground Pokémon, 4 times effective, and the blow stopped that Onix in its tracks. Mismagius's Confuse Ray finished confusing the other, and under the girl's direction, they cooperated to subdue 1 Onix first. The confused Onix, dazed and panicked, began charging wildly and accidentally charged straight toward Aoki. Aoki's jaw set. He needed an Onix for a hunter quest. He'd hunted for them for ages, and just as he'd been about to give up, 2 had appeared. The Onix stumbling his way wasn't a top-tier specimen, just yellow aptitude, but at level 23 it still met the quest's requirements. He wouldn't yield it. Slowpoke, Water Gun, Ghastly, Hidden Power, he ordered. Water Gun and a Grass-type Hidden Power were extraordinarily effective against the Onix. The girl saw Aoki suddenly appear and his Pokémon attacking one of the Onix, and her face went cold. "Stop! That's my prey, you unmannered fellow," she shouted. She was still tied up fighting the other Onix and couldn't disengage. Roserade and Mismagius hovered protectively, glaring at Aoki, but he ignored her. He urged his Pokémon on. Murkrow circled overhead, watching. Though the girl had only 2 Pokémon in plain sight, there might be tricks. Mismagius itself had been hidden moments ago. Still, the fight ended quickly on both sides. Aoki trapped the Onix in a Pokeball. The girl finished slightly faster and skillfully recalled her own Onix into its ball. She marched over and saw Aoki nonchalantly slip the captured Pokeball into his pocket. Her anger flared again. "Hey, you rude guy! I said that was my prey! Didn't you hear me?" she snapped. Roserade and Mismagius hovered before her in a standoff, but Aoki finally turned his attention to her. Up close, she was younger than he'd expected, probably about his age. Aoki didn't answer her accusation. Instead, he raised an eyebrow and said, "Hunter?" The girl froze. His guess had hit the mark. She was a Pokémon hunter. "A hunter? Whose prey are you talking about?" Childish, Aoki added with a hint of mockery before she could reply. He could tell from the way she moved and fought. He was certain. Her cheeks flushed. Flustered, she fumbled for a retort, then snapped. Humph, you stole my prey, and now you act unreasonable. Roserade, Stun Spore, Miss Magus, Confuse Ray. Aoki didn't intend to go easy because she was a girl. In his prior life, he'd faced and defeated many dangerous trainers, women included. Murkrow, blow away the Stun Spore. Slowpoke, use Psychic to disrupt Confuse Ray. Weevil, quick attack, then Sucker Punch. Murkrow's wings scattered Roserade's spores before they could settle, and Slowpoke's Psychic disrupted Miss Magus' Confuse Ray, so it never took hold. Weavile was already streaking in at lightning speed. The girl kept her distance, cautious, so Aoki didn't have a full scan of her team, but from what he'd seen, her Pokemon were strong, not overwhelmingly so. Weevil's Sucker Punch would certainly rattle them. The girl had no obvious counter to Weevil up close. Both sides braced, ready for the next exchange. Second update today, seeking monthly votes, recommendation votes, collections, Chapter 155, Skarmory, Seeking's monthly pass. The girl watched the Sneasel charging straight for her with a cold expression. She understood it meant to kill. She snatched a Pokeball from her belt and tossed it. Sneasel! Another Sneasel materialized on the field. Aoki's Sneasel froze, surprised. He hadn't expected the girl to have a Sneasel of her own, and didn't follow up with another sneak attack. It sensed danger from the newcomer and hesitated. Aoki frowned as he looked at the suddenly summoned Sneasel. He didn't blame his Sneasel for pausing. It had only just been caught, and in an emergency, its instincts would naturally override his commands. Trust had to be built. But the girl having a Sneasel too was unexpected. Sneasel wasn't a common sight like Beedrill. It was fairly rare. Judging by his Sneasel's reaction, the opponents must be strong enough to pose a threat, otherwise his would not have stopped. Come back, Sneasel, Aoki said, his expression serious. This girl was clearly a hunter. Getting this far meant she wasn't weak. From how she handled her Pokemon just now, she wasn't some inexperienced novice. Even if her true strength would only come out in battle, Aoki could tell she wasn't to be trifled with. The question of who would live and who would die was uncertain. The girl, cheeks flushed with anger, suddenly demanded, Hey, are you a hunter too? After a beat, Aoki nodded. No point lying, she wouldn't have believed him anyway. Her eyes swept over Aoki's team, a Sneasel rivaling her own, a light pink shiny Slowpoke, a well-built Honchkrow, and an elusive Ghastly, each a capable fighter. She feared her other Onix might truly be lost. Although she wasn't intimidated by Aoki, her real ability would only show in a fight. Still, from his ruthless decisiveness, she knew he was dangerous. Aoki felt a twinge of hesitation himself. This girl wasn't like the Team Rocket grunts he'd run into before. Her survival and hunting skills were solid, so their combat capabilities weren't far apart. But he made up his mind. Attack. Even if there was a cost, he would hold her here. Her current strength was already notable, and who knew how powerful she might become later. A minor dispute now could light a fuse for a direct confrontation down the road. If her display so far was her full strength, he was about 80% sure he could detain her. Slowpoke, nasty plot. Honchkrow, tailwind support. Sneasel, agility. If they were going to battle, he'd at least get his Pokemon ready. The girl watched Aoki issuing commands, his face cold and resolved as if ready to fight to the death, and scoffed inwardly. Where did he get the confidence to think he could keep her here? Hey, you rude jerk. It's just an Onix. Must you fight to the death over it? Do you really think you can take me? She snapped, exasperated. From her perspective, she was the one wronged. His desperate stance was baffling. Aoki ignored her railing and continued to prepare. Ghastly stayed hidden at his side, guarding against surprises. Her words having no effect on the unyielding man across from her, another flare of frustration rose in the girl. But was she really going to match him, blow for blow over an Onix? That would be foolish. With nowhere else to vent, she stomped her foot hard into the stones as if punishing that expressionless idiot opposite her. After a few angry breaths, she deflated like a punctured ball. Honestly, why am I bothering with a lunatic? What rotten luck. Humph, she muttered, retrieving another Pokeball from her belt and flicking it into the air. Aoki's eyes narrowed at the new Pokeball. She had more Pokemon? Just as he braced to strike, A bird Pokemon sprang forth, its body sheathed in silver-white steel with red underwings and a beak full of sharp teeth. The name came to Aoki at once. Skarmory. A steel flying type, armored and defensively formidable. Apart from weaknesses to fire and electric, it halved damage from normal, flying, psychic, dragon, and fairy types, and took only a quarter damage from bug and grass moves. Ground and poison attacks couldn't touch it at all. Out of 18 types, 10 were either ineffective or reduced. Excellent didn't begin to describe it. Aoki had no fire or electric types. Facing Skarmory would put him at a severe disadvantage. Then, with her cheeks puffed and a fierce glare at Aoki, the girl did something unexpected. She leapt onto Skarmory's back. One by one, she recalled her other Pokemon, muttering, "Don't stoop to a lunatic's level. Don't stoop to a lunatic's level." She didn't look back at Aoki as she patted Skarmory's neck to hurry it along. As she took off, though, she couldn't quite let go of her anger. From high above, she shouted, "Humph, you lunatic, I won't stoop to your level. My name is Dao Lu. Remember it, stay far away when you hear it, or I'll bite you to death." Only after saying that did she seem to feel some relief. Then she rode Skarmory and disappeared toward the horizon. Slowpoke and the others watched their opponent flee, eyes shifting to Aoki, waiting for orders. He stayed motionless for a long time, simply watching her go. After a moment, he couldn't help but mutter, "Shh, maybe I should catch a flying mount too. That'd be handy." His thoughts were oddly out of place. He'd failed to stop the hunter Dao Lu, but there was nothing to be done. The distance was too great, and Skarmory's appearance had thrown him off. Before Skarmory arrived, he'd been 80% confident he could keep her. Afterward, that confidence fell to 50%, maybe less. Since it was impossible now, futile struggle was pointless. Still, he had gained an Onyx, so the day wasn't a total loss. And his offhand wish to find a flying mount? He meant it. Third update. Please subscribe for monthly passes, recommendation tickets, and collections. I'm not asking for donations right now. Can't repay debts. Thank you for your support. Chapter 156, The Protagonist's Current Pokemon. Below is the protagonist's current Pokemon roster and their details. Murkrow, green, gender, male, level 22, type dark, flying, ability prankster, gives priority to status moves, held item, none, egg moves, punishment, power equals 60 plus 20 users' positive stat stages, dark, physical, damage scales with the foe's boosts, sucker punch, power equals 60, dark, physical, priority strike that can hit first, roost, status, flying, lands on the ground and restores half HP. Basic moves, peck, power equals 40, flying, physical, astonish, power equals 30, ghost, physical, may cause the opponent to flinch, 30% chance. Pursuit, power equals 40, dark, physical, deals 2 times damage if the target switches out. Wing attack, nightshade, move tutor moves, gust, status, dark, steals healing effects or stat boosts intended for the opponent. Tailwind, status, flying, raises all allied speed for 4 turns. TMTR moves, dark pulse, protect, substitute, screech, hidden power, electric. Shiny Slowpoke, dark green, gender male, level 25, type water, psychic, ability oblivious, held item none. Egg moves, rest, rain dance, teleport. Basic moves, curse, yawn, tackle, growl, water gun, confusion, disable, headbutt. Move tutor moves, calm mind, Psyshock, TMTR moves, protect, hidden power, fire. Ghastly, dark green, gender male, level 19, type ghost, poison, ability, levitate, held item, none. Egg moves, fire punch, scary face, haze. Basic moves, hypnosis, lick, spite, mean look, curse, nightshade, confuse ray. Move tutor moves, rest, shadow ball, psychic, skill swap, snore. TMTR moves, protect, hidden power, grass, sleep talk. Scorup male, level 1, type poison, bug, ability, sniper, held item, none. Egg moves, screech, agility, poison tail, pursuit. Basic moves, bite, poison sting, leer. Move tutor moves, none. TMTR moves, none. Miltank, light green, gender female, level 21, type normal, ability, thick fat. Held item, none. Moves present, endure. Basic moves, tackle, growl, defense, curl, stomp, milk drink, endure, rollout. Move tutor moves, helping hand, heal, bell, block. TM moves, none. Sneasel, Lou, gender male, level 25, type dark ice, ability, keen eye, held item, none. Egg moves, bite, ice punch, ice shard, icicle crash. Basic moves, scratch, leer, taunt, quick attack, feint attack, icy wind, fury swipes, agility, metal claw, hone claws. Move tutor moves, knockoff, snatch, low kick. TMTR moves, none. Chapter 157, Back to Mahogany Town, seeking monthly ticket subscription. After the young hunter left, Aoki didn't stay on the mountain any longer. He had managed to catch the onyx, so the main purpose of the trip to the ice mountain was accomplished. He released the newly caught onyx from its pokeball. Under Slowpoke's quiet coercion, it quickly submitted. Although he planned to turn the onyx in to the Hunters Guild for a mission reward, it made perfect sense to use it as a mount on the way down. The creature was ideal for mountain paths. Aoki and his Pokémon climbed onto Onyx's back and descended the slope at a breathtaking pace. The rugged trail was like flat ground to the rock serpent. Once they were off the mountain, Aoki didn't recall Onyx. Traveling that way was far faster than walking. It did draw ire from many wild Pokémon, but Aoki didn't care. He considered it training for his team. The young girl he'd seen earlier had left a mark on his mind, and he knew there were many powerful young trainers out there. He couldn't afford to be complacent. Onyx barreled through underbrush and small trees, only making slight course adjustments for larger trunks. As they passed through other Pokémon territories, the commotion they caused was significant and often taken as provocation. Onyx, it would never have acted like this on its own, was forced into compliance by the presence of the trainer on its head. It wanted desperately to tell the enraged wild Pokémon that it was being compelled and shouldn't be punished, but it couldn't get a word across. Still, most of the wild Pokémon couldn't actually stop them. Merely moving through a territory was usually enough to cause pursuers to break off. The persistent few could be slowed by Weavile's ice-type attacks, and those that kept chasing were met with a barrage of moves from Darkrai, Slowpoke, and Weavile. In the end, Onyx suffered little in the way of real harm, and they made steady progress. By sunset, riding Onyx, Aoki reached the edge of the forest far faster than when he'd entered. If not for the increasing number of people ahead, he might have ridden straight into Mahogany Town. He even considered keeping Onyx as a long-term means of transport. It was far more convenient than traveling on foot. Having learned his lesson about drawing attention, he changed into ordinary clothes, pulled down a baseball cap, and walked through the crowd with his head lowered as he entered Mahogany Town. Something in the air felt heavier. The town had a tense undertone, almost like a current of hostility. The conflict between the Alliance and Team Rocket was clearly escalating. I should finish the mission as soon as possible, he told himself. The Pokémon Center was quieter than usual. The usual bustle had thinned. Aoki didn't even have to wait in line to get treatment. He handed the Ultra Ball with Weavile inside to the medical staff, paid the fee, and asked them to examine it. He had just caught Weavile in the wild, and although it appeared healthy, he couldn't be sure there weren't hidden injuries from fighting or living rough. After about 10 minutes, the staff returned the ball. Weavile was in generally good condition, but slightly undernourished. Its development was normal. The medic recommended giving it more nutritious food if possible, energy cubes, for example. Aoki smiled and nodded, indicating he would take care of it, and he booked a room at the Pokémon Center. Given how unstable things felt in town, he preferred staying somewhere safe. That evening, he slipped into Mahogany's black market. Since Mahogany hosted the largest Team Rocket base in Johto, most of the black market regulars were Rocket members. In his previous life, he'd been most familiar with this market. He headed to the Hunters Guild, submitted the Pokémon he'd caught, and received the corresponding points in money. He kept Onyx for now. The mission he'd accepted allowed a 1-month deadline, so there was no rush. Swinub earned him 150,000 points, and a low-grade Donphan was exchanged for 500,000. He'd also earned 200,000 Alliance coins earlier for making energy cubes for Akane. Added to the 2,400,000 Alliance coins he already had, his total came to 3,250,000 Alliance coins. At a general stall, he bought ingredients to craft high-grade energy cubes specifically for Weevil, plus some miscellaneous supplies, spending 250,000 Alliance coins. When he left the black market, he had exactly 3,000 Alliance coins remaining. For an ordinary person, that would be a fortune, but for someone who needed to train 6 or more Pokémon, it was only a start. Purchasing rare items or TM discs would drain his funds instantly. He needed to hold some reserves for emergencies, and unless it became absolutely necessary, he hoped to obtain desired moves from Team Rocket's exchange lists instead of buying TMs outright. Leaving the market brought a small sense of relief. The atmosphere there was strained too. Once chatty vendors were almost silent, and many people were desperate to sell or to buy anything that would immediately boost their strength. Alliance trainers had been appearing more frequently on the streets, and new faces were cropping up, rumors were spreading. Few people exchanged greetings. Most hurried past one another, speaking only a word before moving on. Aoki didn't stay out late. He returned to the Pokémon Center. At least there he felt safe, and he still carried the identity of an Alliance trainer. Lying in bed, he watched the ceiling and thought, tomorrow I'll pick up the things and leave. The situation is getting out of hand. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep. Chapter 158, Lake of Rage Base. Added for Death of Satan's Necromancer for a 10,000-point reward. Early the next morning, after leaving the Pokémon Center, Aoki disguised himself and headed north toward Mahogany Town. The Lake of Rage lay beyond Mahogany. Once there had been a few settlements around the lake, but after Team Rocket moved in, the local residents relocated to Mahogany Town. Now the area around the Lake of Rage was entirely occupied by Team Rocket members. Dressed in casual clothes and carrying no Pokémon, Aoki walked along the road north. Because many people used to travel from Mahogany Town to the lake, the Alliance had built a road here. It was meant for residents and tourists, but now it served Team Rocket. Few people were on the road, most bore Team Rocket traits. Though not obvious at a glance, Aoki could pick them out from certain details. He kept walking north alone. 2 hours later, the road ended at a steel fence with a barrier and several guards at the entrance. Adjusting his clothes, Aoki approached under their watchful eyes. A guard stepped forward, expressionless. "This is private property. No entry without permission," the guard said. Aoki didn't answer. He subtly lifted his shirt to show a belt with the Team Rocket emblem and then produced a Team Rocket ID from his belt. The guard's face softened a little at the sight. He took the ID, said stiffly, "Wait here," and went into the guardhouse to verify it. The other guards kept their eyes on Aoki. Aoki nodded slightly. Although many Team Rocket sites were run down, this one's management was still competent. The guards were proof enough. It made sense to assign reliable people to such an important place. Otherwise, they wouldn't last long against the Alliance. The guard didn't make him wait long. After verifying Aoki's identity, he returned the ID and signaled for the barrier to open. This was only the approach to the Lake of Rage, not the research base itself, and the level of security was strict, likely because of recent events in Mahogany Town. After the barrier, people no longer hid their Team Rocket affiliation. Everyone wore some insignia, some in full uniform, others with a small emblem pinned to their chest. To avoid drawing attention, Aoki took a Team Rocket badge from his belt, pinned it to his shirt, and tucked his shirt into his pants so his Team Rocket belt showed. The suspicious glances dwindled. Calmly, he released Murkrow from its Pokeball. Once Murkrow perched on his shoulder, the remaining stares vanished entirely. Sometimes, showing your sharp teeth is enough to make those with ulterior motives behave. He walked toward the Lake of Rage research base with Murkrow at his side. More and more Team Rocket members appeared, many with Pokémon by their side, and they ignored him. He had blended in. An hour later, at the entrance to an underground passage, 10 Team Rocket members in uniform stood guard. The security here was much tighter than elsewhere. Aoki's approach caught their attention. 2 of them stepped forward to block him. "Kid, you're not allowed past here," said one of the 2, a burly man with a fierce face and a grin that could silence a crying child. Aoki glanced at him and said, "I'd like to see your captain. I have something important." The burly man was easily 2 meters tall, broad and muscular. Aoki looked small beside him. The 2 guards exchanged a look, then nodded toward Murkrow on Aoki's shoulder. The bird's presence and Aoki's calm told them he wasn't a green recruit. "Come with us, and don't look around," the burly man barked, leading Aoki to the passage. Clearly, Aoki's bearing had earned their grudging respect. No one could just walk up and ask to see their captain. They brought Aoki before a young man of ordinary build who had been idly picking at his nails with a dagger. The burly guard announced, "Captain, this kid wants to see you." The captain looked up and asked, "What is it?" Captain, if there's nothing else, I'll—" The burly man hurried away like a mouse scurrying from a cat. Aoki produced a small black badge from his belt, showed it to the captain, and then pocketed it. The captain's expression shifted immediately. He stared at Aoki for 3 seconds and then said, "I've been waiting for you for a long time. You're finally here." Aoki was taken aback. Waiting for him? Had Shadow arranged for someone to meet him? The captain stood and said, "Come with me. I'll take you inside." He turned to his men and added, "I'm taking him in for a moment. If any of you slack off, humph." At the sound of that, the burly guards visibly shivered and nodded in unison. Satisfied, the young man opened the underground entrance and led Aoki inside. "Paying off debts. Please give me monthly votes, recommendations, and bookmarks." Chapter 158, Battle Assessment, 14. Aoki had been to Team Rocket's Lake of Rage research base countless times in his previous life, so he knew the layout well. But this time, it was different. The base's facilities were all in excellent condition, as if they'd never been attacked by the Alliance, so the place looked almost brand new. The last time he'd been here, everything had been dilapidated and smashed. Battle scars were visible on walls, floors, and in every corner. Back then, he'd been assigned to clear debris so Team Rocket could rebuild their research operations, and he'd memorized the terrain and directions down to the smallest detail. He followed closely behind the young man who led him, slipping past checkpoints and heading deeper into the base. Aoki remembered that the complex had 5 underground levels, each requiring higher clearance. They were already down to the 3rd level, which normally required at least a squad leader's rank. When they reached the entrance to the 4th level, the young man stopped and keyed a string of numbers into the automatic door. A moment later, an image appeared on the screen above the keypad, a middle-aged man with a small 2-pronged mustache. "Sir, he's here," the young man said respectfully to the man on screen. "Oh, bring him in," the mustachioed man replied, narrowing his eyes when he caught sight of Aoki behind his escort. With that, the door, normally requiring a high-level clearance, opened. The young man led Aoki further inside. By standard protocol, opening that door would have required squad leader clearance and an authorization from above. The man on the monitor was clearly at least a Team Rocket captain. This had to be the person Shadow had arranged for him to meet. Team Rocket captains generally had the strength of peak elite trainers. A few were as strong as junior quasi-elite 4. That was about as high as Aoki had managed to reach in his old life. To go higher, you needed raw power, yes, but contribution points were an equally important metric. The base's 4th level was already considered a fairly confidential area. By his true strength, Aoki wouldn't qualify to be here. Everything was due to Shadow's influence. They arrived at an office. In the center sat the same middle-aged man in a white lab coat, rubbing his mustache and smiling as soon as he saw Aoki. "This little guy must be the target of the mission, right?" The young man, named Moyen, bowed his head. "Yes, sir. I saw his badge." The captain looked Aoki up and down, then fixed his gaze on the honchcrow perched on Aoki's shoulder. The bird's feathers prickled as if something were staring at it. The captain chuckled and pressed a yellow button on his desk. With a clunk, a section of wall split open to reveal a secret training room. It looked purpose-built, large, full of specialized equipment, with a sturdy battle arena in the center. "Go test his strength," the captain said, fingers stroking his mustache. "Yes, sir," Moyen answered respectfully. "Test his strength?" Aoki wondered. Was this part of Shadow's mission? He stepped into the training room, wary. The captain lounged in his chair, amusement in his voice. "Show me what you can do. Pass the assessment and you'll get what you want." Aoki felt helpless. The captain and his subordinate were clearly at least squad leader level. How could he fight them? The man seemed to read his thoughts. "If the gap is too wide, it's pointless. Moyen, just use one Pokemon. Little guy, you're not limited by the number of Pokemon or any battle rules. Fight as hard as you like." Aoki narrowed his eyes. He had some Pokemon he couldn't reveal, but facing only one opponent made victory possible. More importantly, there were no battle rule restrictions. and they wouldn't dare kill him outright. He represented Shadow, one of the two powerful deputy leaders of Team Rocket's Shadow Group, an elite 4-level figure. Even if Shadow wouldn't personally worry over a low-ranking member, the captain wouldn't want to make a poor impression on someone like Shadow. Moyen drew a Pokeball from his belt, the Team Rocket emblem flashing on it, and threw it onto the field. A Golbat materialized, wings beating as it hovered in the arena. Data flashed briefly in Aoki's mind. Pokemon Golbat, light green, gender male, level 32, type poison/flying. Ability inner focus, held item none. Egg moves, Gust, Sucker Punch. Basic moves, Absorb, Supersonic, Astonish, Bite, Wing Attack, Confuse Ray, Air Cutter, Swift, Poison Fang, Mean Look. Tutor moves, Snatch, Defog TMs, Hidden Power, Water, Shadow Ball, Sleep Talk, Substitute. For a squad leader, Pokemon tended to be level 30 and up. This level 32 Golbat was likely the weakest in Moyen's roster. Moyen didn't show his best, partly because he didn't need to, and partly because he didn't want Shadow to see him brutalizing a newcomer. Even if Shadow wouldn't personally punish a lowly officer, a casual complaint from Shadow could attract plenty of attention, and more than one person would be eager to throw Moyen under the bus to curry favor. If the opponent was holding back, Aoki had more room to work with. Chapter 159, Moyen. Seeking monthly votes, 24. As a poison and flying type Pokemon, Golbat's poison side could be countered by Slowpoke's psychic type, something Aoki's had, and its flying typing could be checked by Weevil's ice moves. But Slowpoke could not be brought out openly right now, so Weevil was the best choice. Although the middle-aged man had said Aokis could use unlimited Pokemon, Ghastly was only level 19 and no match for a level 32 Golbat, and Miltank was likewise unsuitable at the moment. Aokis threw a Pokeball. A flash of red light, and Weavile appeared on the field, arms crossed and head tilted haughtily. Moyen and the middle-aged man showed a flicker of surprise when they saw it. Even at a glance, they could tell this Weavile's aptitude was exceptional. Murkrow, Weavile, you too, go, Aokis called. He trusted Murkrow implicitly, but Weavile had only just been caught and their bond wasn't yet solid. Its performance could decide the match. Golbat, use Confuse Ray, Moyen said calmly. A strange, shimmering orb formed in Golbat's mouth. Murkrow, Tailwind, Weavile, Agility, Aokis countered. Tailwind would boost both Murkrow's and Weavile's speed, and with Weavile following up with Agility, it should have a slight edge over Golbat. Aokis had already removed Murkrow's weights, so it too was at full capacity. Golbat's Confuse Ray was fast, but as a Ghost-type move, it had limited effect on Murkrow and Weavile, both Dark types. It didn't hit as intended. Murkrow didn't dodge, but it wasn't confused either. Moyen wasn't surprised. He'd used Confuse Ray as a test. Weavile, Taunt, then Quick Attack. Murkrow, come in close with Wing Attack. Weavile shot a wisp of dark energy. Golbat's eyes flared red, and it seemed briefly compelled to attack. Taunt forced Golbat to use only attacking moves for a time, preventing it from relying on status moves. Golbat met Murkrow head-on. Wings charged with flying energy slammed together. The collision favored Golbat. Murkrow was sent flying, while Golbat only wavered and stepped back. As Murkrow was knocked away, Weevil dashed in with Quick Attack, claws raking at Golbat. Weevil, Ice Punch, Aokis barked. Weevil's arm glowed with icy energy. The Ice Punch landed. Ice was super effective against flying, and Golbat took much more damage than from the prior clash. Moyen immediately ordered, Golbat Swift! Golbat fired Swift. Many of Golbat's moves had Ghost typing, which were weak against the Dark types in the field, constraining Moyen's options. Weevil couldn't fully avoid the Swift and had to abandon its next move to dodge. Aokis watched with a strange light in his eyes. The middle-aged man's claim of no rules definitely hid layers of complexity. If the battle continued this way, Aokis wasn't sure of victory. Weevil was fast and capable, but their coordination still lacked that last bit of polish. When Aokis commanded Ice Punch, Weevil reacted quickly, but the attack wasn't already fully prepared. If their bond had been tighter, the move would have been ready the instant it was needed. As if making up his mind, Aokis said coldly, Murkrow, Hidden Power. Weavile, Icicle Crash. Aim for the trainer. No rules meant anything went. Attack the trainer directly. If Golbat tried to defend, it would leave an opening. If it didn't, then the human might get hit. Either way, with two Pokemon cooperating, it could turn the tide. The middle-aged observer paused from stroking his beard and then laughed. Murkrow condensed an electric-type hidden power in the air, while Weevil began drawing cold white currents around itself. Moyon's face showed a brief surprise when he heard the command, but then he smiled slightly. If you were in Team Rocket, you used every trick to win. Fighting honorably like a league trainer would be almost quaint. Murkrow's energy orb and Weevil's towering icicle bypassed the Golbat standing before them and hurtled straight for Moyon. The impact kicked up a huge cloud of dust. Aoki's frowned. Golbat hadn't moved to defend or counterattack. It had simply stood there, inert. Clap, clap, clap. The middle-aged man walked to the side of the field, applauding slowly. I assumed that after you left the island and spent time away, you'd have forgotten how to fight, but your reaction is excellent. You truly are someone Lord Shadow values. Aoki arched an eyebrow. Was that a test of his ruthlessness? The smoke cleared enough for Moyon to step forward. A wheezing materialized at his side, clearly summoned to intercept Murkrow and Weevil's strike. Aoki's pupils narrowed. The chip's scan had shown that this wheezing was level 39, with a dark green aptitude, making it far stronger than Golbat. With Murkrow and Weevil's current strength, even together, they weren't likely to beat it. The middle-aged man clapped Moyon on the shoulder and announced, "Let me introduce you. This is your senior, one of the earlier Trial Island participants. He's now a Team Rocket squad leader. Moyon,